Hi everyone, and thank you for taking the time to be here today. My name is Kelly Rolls, and I'm part of the customer experience and quality team here in MAPS. I'm also joined by my colleagues Avon and Erica, who will introduce themselves a little bit later on as the session progresses. I will walk us through the quality section, and Avon will finish strong with customer experience before we move on to any questions at the end. So the bits that I will take us through today is primarily going to be focused on designing quality assurance systems for debt advice delivery, particularly within a partnership model. So what we're aiming to do here is to help you think about maybe what good looks like, what strong quality systems typically include, and how you might design something that works for your model. Importantly, this isn't about prescribing a single way of doing things. Partnerships will look and feel really differently, but there are some consistent features that we see in strong and well-performing services, and that's what we'll try and focus on today. So with that in mind, let's take us forward. Before we get into the specific quality mechanisms, we're going to start with workforce structure because quality really starts there. So one of the key messages that we want to land really early is that quality shouldn't be something that's added in later. It should be something that's designed into your operating model really early on and pretty much from day one. What we often see is where quality is thought about or added later, sometimes it can become reactive, inconsistent, or more difficult to manage. Whereas strong delivery models tend to build quality in from the outset. So that usually includes things like clear accountability. So someone that owns quality at a strategic level, defined supervision capacity, so oversight feels realistic and not stretched. Central visibility, particularly important in partnerships, and really clear governance and reporting lines. And importantly, mechanisms to ensure consistency across partners, because that's where risk can often sit. So as you're thinking about your model, it's worth asking yourselves, where does quality sit structurally and who is accountable for it? So this slide probably brings that to life a little bit more practically. When you're designing your structure, there are a few key things to think about. Firstly, supervisor to advisor ratios is a really important one. So we often see examples like 1:8, but the important thing is, does that ratio allow for meaningful oversight for you? Because supervision isn't just case checking, it's slightly more than that. It's about support and development. And then secondly, having dedicated quality resource. That could be perhaps a quality manager or a central function, but it needs to be, it needs to have authority, visibility, and the ability to influence. Then thirdly, clarity of ownership. So who is owning competence, who's owning supervision, and who owns quality outcomes? And then finally, consistency. In partnership models, you need mechanisms to ensure supervisors are able to interpret standards in the same way, and that quality is being applied consistently across regions, because without that, variation can creep in. So first line quality assurance. This is where quality really comes to life in day-to-day delivery. So embedding standards into daily practice. So yeah, first line quality is where quality is built into everyday practice. And this is the bit that should be closest to the advisor, most immediate, and definitely most influential. First line quality systems tend to include a few key things. Structured case review templates aligned to regulation and to the MAP standards. So advisors and supervisors are working from a shared understanding of both expectation and what good looks like. A risk-based sampling approach, not just random check-in, but focusing where risk sits, and also something that feels representative from across all channels and case types that might be done across the partnership. Regular documented supervision, so there's consistency and traceability, is something that is important to include. And also clear feedback loops. This is something that's really important. So quality findings should directly feed into advisor development. And then data capture. So you can identify trends, reoccurring themes, and areas for improvement. So the key message here is if your first line quality assurance is strong, then independent assurance shouldn't bring any surprises or unexpected outcomes as we've got there. It should validate what you already know rather than undercovering things for the first time. So consistency across the supply chain. Now, in multi-partner models, consistency does become absolutely critical. Without it, you can have different interpretations of standards, different thresholds of what good looks like, or even what minimum compliance looks like, and ultimately different customer outcomes. So strong systems tend to build in consistency deliberately, and this might include, and we've got a couple of examples there, so regular calibration sessions for supervisors, shared scoring approaches, and clear escalation routes, along with opportunities for supervisors to come together and share practice. And this is a really important part of being able to build consistency across the supply chain, having that one outlet for people to come together. Another important thing is central visibility of quality findings, because what this gives is the opportunity to spot themes, identify any risks, and respond at a partnership level as opposed to individually. So without active consistency management, variation sometimes can be inevitable. So thinking about what this looks like then in terms of supervision models across a partnership. Now, I'm really aware that compared to some of the other slides, there's a lot of information on this slide. Please don't worry if it feels a little bit too small. I'll run through what the models can look like over this slide and the next slide, but we will make sure that this is recorded for you to watch back, and we'll make sure that we get a copy of the slides to you as well. So building on what we've just been talking about, there are many different ways that a partnership could structure an approach to technical supervision. Broadly, we tend to see two common models and a third more hybrid model, which we'll go into on the next slide. So the first model here is the local supervision model. That's where supervision sits within each delivery partner. So technical supervisors will review cases locally, they'll provide direct feedback, and are closely integrated into day-to-day management if they are not already in that management role themselves. So this model can work really well in terms of immediacy of support, relationship building, and advisor development. But it does require strong mechanisms to ensure consistency across all partners. That's where the lead organisation still plays a key role, bringing supervisors together, sharing learning and tracking themes centrally. So the second model then that we'll have a look at on the slide is the centralised model. So here supervision sits at the lead organisational level. So central technical supervisors will review cases across the whole of the partnership. They'll often provide feedback, which is usually done remotely, but can happen face-to-face as well. And they often have visibility across the whole region. So this can support stronger consistency, clearer thematic analysis, and centralised oversight of risks and trends. Now, it's important to say neither model is right. It really depends on your structure, scale, and maturity. What is important is how consistency is managed and how maintaining visibility across the partnership will be achieved regardless of the model. Now, on this next slide, and again, yeah, lots of information on this one. We've got the hybrid supervision model, and in reality, many partnerships might choose to operate this type of model. So what does this mean? As an example, this can be local supervision where capability exists and centralized support where it doesn't. So what this can do is create flexibility and resilience across partnerships, particularly where partners vary in size or maturity. It also supports shared learning across the partnership. And alongside that, it's probably worth thinking about career development, which is something that appears on this slide as well. Different supervision models can shape different pathways. For example, local models might support progression into supervisory roles within organisations, whereas central or hybrid models might create opportunities for more specialist or cross-partnership type roles. And that's really important for retaining talent, building capability, and probably sustaining your workforce over time. So it feels like the career development part definitely sits hand in hand with some of the options for supervision models. So bringing all of that together, a lot of information, I think regardless of the model that you are thinking about or that you choose to adopt, there are a few things partnerships should always be able to demonstrate. So clear technical oversight, consistent interpretation of standards and regulation, mechanisms to identify and respond to trends, and effective supervision and development of advisors. So again, it's less about the structure itself and more about what your model enables you to do. So next, we're going to move on to take it up a level from maybe what first line quality assurance looks like and talk about some of the things that MAPS do in more of a second or third line quality assurance, and talk about some of the individual features that you'll be interacting with over the space of the grant. So moving on to controls self-assessment, or CSA. This is really about ownership really of the controls environment. So rather than quality being something that's done to you, CSA is more about organizations understanding how they are meeting the standards, what controls they have in place, and where any gaps may sit. Strong CSA approaches tend to move beyond a static exercise, and instead they operate more as a live governance tool. And that usually involves a clear mapping of controls to each standard, a mix of, sorry, let me just move us on here, a mix of preventative, detective and corrective controls, named owners for each controls, RAG rating supported by evidence, and clear actions where improvement is needed. And I'll flick to the next slide shortly, which will bring this to life a little bit. I understand what I might be saying here. If you've not experienced a controls environment before, might feel a little bit strange. But one of the key things to say here is it's not enough for a control to exist. It needs to be operating effectively. So based upon how the service is set up, and that's something that can be tested through the CSA. So CSA really works best where it's embedded into perhaps governance, regularly reviewed and actively used to drive any improvements through the service. So again, I'm just going to flag here, there's a lot of information on this slide, but it's more just an example of what a controls library will look like. So you'll be able to see this when you get the slides, and some of you may have experience of operating in this way. I also want to flag here that the example is based on the standards as they are currently, and we are just a few days away from officially launching the new standard. So the numbers that we've got here are responding to older standards. But yeah, I think what was crucial to point out is thinking about how CSA could work across your partnership. So, for example, is this something that could be coordinated centrally, or is it completed individually by partners, or even a combination of both? And really, how do you bring that together to create a partnership-wide view? CSA does really become a valuable tool because it's able to give you visibility of risk across the whole model. And also think about how you could evidence your controls, how often you might want to review your controls, and how findings are discussed. So in stronger models, CSA feeds directly into governance meetings, quality discussions, and some continuous improvement activities. And on here, you can see, just highlight a quick example across 1A, which is currently being impartial and accurate. You can see that there's a focus of the standard, which is ensuring the guidance and advice given to the customer is impartial and accurate. And then there's 3 different listings under the controls there. So under preventative, technical training, incorporated modules on these topics. Detective is through case review processes and how criteria can identify inaccuracy. And then the corrective control would be refresher training to assess learning needs and gaps in knowledge. So each of the MAP standards will contain a focus and a way to add a preventative, detective and corrective control. So next, I'm going to move us on to the customer facing assessment, or CFA, as you'll hear to it being referred to. So what actually is CFA? This is the independent assurance layer, essentially, where case files are reviewed against the MAP standards by an external party. So the key role of CFA is to provide an objective view of compliance and assurance the standards are being met in practice. Strong partnerships tend to engage with CFA in a really structured way. So that includes managing case submissions really clearly, reviewing findings at a thematic level, and tracking actions that come out of those findings. So one of the most important things here is alignment between internal quality assurance and independent assessment. Where things tend to become challenging is where there's a significant difference between how cases are scored internally and how they're assessed independently. Strong models tend to build in regular calibration sessions, opportunities to align interpretation, and also open discussion around findings. So over time, the aim would be for it to reduce variation and consistently improve the service. Alongside that, CFA isn't just about individual case outcomes. It's really about what the findings are telling you. So, for example, are there any reoccurring issues? Are there particular standards where performance is weaker? And are there trends across certain delivery partners or channels? And importantly, what might you be doing in response to that? And that could include things like targeted training, process changes, or additional supervision. So again, similarly to CSA, the value comes from how the findings are used and not just the activity itself. So next we will move on to training and CPD. this is where quality and workforce development really do come together. I think one of the key messages here is that training should be linked to quality outcomes. So rather than being separate where possible, training should be informed by quality assurance findings, specifically targeting and identifying any gaps and responding to any emerging risks that might come through CFA or even CSA. So strong approaches tend to include clear competence frameworks, structured induction pathways, ongoing CPD linked to real findings, and also supervision that supports development. And importantly, monitoring our advisors completing training and is it actually improving outcomes? Because ultimately the goal is to support advisors to deliver consistent high quality advice. Alongside training and development, it's also important to consider alignment with the debt advice quality framework. So the framework sets expectations around advisor competence and professionalism. So partnerships should have a think about how advisors are trained or qualified for the work that they will be doing, how roles align to different work levels, and how competence is maintained over time. This also includes maintaining accurate and up-to-date training and qualification records. Accredited training can play a role here, and this can provide consistency, external insurance, and alignment to recognised standards. But I think it's also really important to say that accreditation sits alongside strong supervision and quality assurance. It isn't something that necessarily replaces it. So it's all about how all of these elements really come together in a strong, coherent system. So next, I'm going to pass over to my lovely colleague, Avon, who will walk us through customer experience and complaints.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Avon. I'm Senior Customer Experience Manager here at MAPS. And today, just going to cover a little bit around customer experience and complaints and some strong models that these typically demonstrate. So if I can, Kelly, over to the first slide, please. So Customer Experience Matters is the title of this slide. And what I mean by that is feedback from end-to-end journey. So this is separate to the measurement of longer term impact of services and more about in the moment feedback, particularly around the feedback loops that you have and the complaints that you may receive. Strong models typically demonstrate structured collection of feedback and making sure that you have a robust system to log complaints as and when they are received. Clear feedback loops and governance of insight, including complaints. So they are often well received together because complaints can give you some really great insight, and customers are often telling you exactly what's happening within the service that's not going quite right. And the feedback can both demonstrate positivity and what's working well in journeys as well. So it gives you a bit of both. Integration of customer insights into quality and customer journey discussions. So understanding customer experience and having strong models that allows organizations to bring the customer into the room when you're discussing potentially a new channel or a new product or a new flow for a customer. So it's really important to have the feedback available to you to draw on as and when you need it. And thematic analysis built in to the way that you handle feedback as well as feedback from complaints, and it allows you to take proactive changes. So rather than waiting for something to go wrong, using the feedback as a whole and holistically allows you to identify somewhere that you might want to do a deep dive from and perhaps pilot something or use something to your advantage early on. And the other thing that I just wanted to say on this slide is that CX isn't around extra work. It's about learning from what customers are going through and what they've already experienced in your services. So it's about understanding the customer needs and what they're saying about what they've already experienced so that you can improve. Next slide, thank you. So why do we collect it? I've covered a little bit about that already. but it's understanding real customer needs and pain points. I think we can design services, but it's our customers and those that use it that are able to tell us exactly how it feels on the other side of it. Again, I've referenced this before, making decisions based on evidence. So customers who provide feedback to us want to be listened to, and being able to turn that into a change in a service or just reinforcement of something that's working well. Having the evidence and available insight to do that is really important. The obvious one, opportunities to improve, reduce complaints, increase satisfaction, and trust is a big one within the organisation, particularly in debt advice. Is sometimes things go wrong, and understanding insight from customers, and again, particularly around complaints, allows you to rebuild that trust as and when it's available. And really key to this is creating feedback loops and driving continuous improvement. Touched on my previous slide, but it's around really making sure that insight is being used at all levels. So whether it's local performance or having discussions in senior meetings, it's around really understanding and making sure that you've got some feedback loops, because as I'll touch on in a second, making sure that you're capturing insights to use it is incredibly important. Next slide. So what does good customer insight collection look like? So there's a few principles that I'm going to run through here. I've put a couple up on the screen, but good insight collection is purposeful. Always starts with a clear reason of why we're asking for feedback. It needs to be proportionate as well, so it needs to match the size and the depth of feedback that we're requesting for in relation to the customer journey and the context in which it's being delivered. Coordinated, so align activity with other insight functions that you may or may not have. So whether this is UX, whether it's research, whether you have other mechanisms in which you capture insight, it's really important to be coordinated. And be considerate as well is another one. So respect the time of customers and the experience that they're going for, and just really emphasizing the fact that only ask for feedback if you're going to use it. Sometimes you can slip into wanting to ask loads and loads of questions right up front, and actually you end up with too much insight and you're unable to kind of see the wood from the trees. So it's making sure that you're considerate about what you're asking. Being transparent, always ask customers what they're thinking and feeling about your service, but tell them why and how their input might make a difference to the services they're receiving. And also make the channels accessible. So however you decide and whatever infrastructure you set up around your surveying, if that's the mechanism you choose to use, make sure it's easy and accessible to those that might want to be feedback. So make it as easy as possible for customers to give you that feedback. The purposeful driven insights up here, I've put on this slide. Defining the reason why you're asking the question, like I said, is essential. If you're asking the same core questions across services, it can help you at particular touch points. It can help you understand the difference between channels, should you have omni-channel journeys. Using the right methods as well. So do you want to ask after the initial interaction? If there are multiple touch points within a journey, you may be better off asking at the end of the journey so you can get kind of the full flow. Open and closed questions are really important to help you get a range of feedback from customers. So you've got some examples up on the screen around how would you rate your satisfaction, some fairly typical ones, how easy was it, but some open questions as well can help you gather some insight that you may not get from some closed questions, and it also helps you do some analysis of those to identify some early trends. And I've touched on it already, but customer friendly design, how are you going to ask customers? Are you doing it in a way that allows you to receive the best feedback that you can get? So sometimes waiting too long after an interaction or making it quite convoluted to provide feedback to you can have negative effects on response rates. Clear, jargon free, so just like how you guys deliver services, same applies to designing feedback collection and using those insights. And the last one that I'm just going to touch on now, lots of regulatory obligations apply here, but around complaints, it's similar to feedback and everything that I've just mentioned before. it should be really easy and clear on how customers can make a complaint if they need to. Sometimes things go wrong, so what we want to do is be able to design an easy to access route. They know where they can go, how to raise it, and have clear complaints policy and processes in place to help support that, so they know exactly where they need to go, exactly what's going to happen throughout their complaints journey, and what's going to happen at the end of it. Complaints are, like I've mentioned right at the beginning, an invaluable source for insight. They are almost telling you exactly what needs to be improved within a service, and it ranges from being able to plug some pretty big gaps around material impact or finances, but some more I guess nuanced, particularly in the debt advice and community-based, is around emotional distress and some barriers that they may be experiencing accessing debt advice in the first instance. So complaints can often help organisations around vulnerable customer issues and help facilitate improvements around that. Process failures, so even with the best intentions, processes can be designed, but again, in practice, as you start to work through them, there's sometimes tweaks that you can identify from complaints. Compliance risks as well, like I mentioned, it may be subject to regulatory complaints obligations. Same applies here. So best practice would be that you'd be able to identify those from your complaints processes, and opportunities to rebuild trust, which is a big one when it comes to complaints. Things go wrong, the opportunity to answer customers' queries, correct anything that needs to be corrected, and rebuild that trust is particularly important, particularly if something happens early on in a journey. Being able to get that back on track is key. And just on the right hand side is just what complaints data might you need. So things to consider here around volumes. Complaint categorization is key as well. Being able to understand where or what within a journey is failing, and being able to categorize any complaints that you receive around them is also key. Root cause, sometimes the issue that a customer may raise with you may not be the actual cause, so being able to identify that is key when you're thinking around complaints, and how you're evidencing and deep diving into the insight that you get from them, and then the outcome, and then whether or not a complaint has been upheld and any redress that you may need to apply. It's a whistle-stop tour, but there are hopefully some tips in there for you, and that's the end of my session. Thank you, Kelly.
Lovely, thank you, Evan. We've got quite a chunk of time, so I will hand over to my colleague Erica, where we'll be able to take some questions.
Yeah, so while people are kind of taking a moment to kind of consider their questions and perhaps put hands up and come on camera, I think permissions might need to be changed, but Kelly is in the process of doing that now. I can see the little icons have all changed. I'd just like to say a really big thank you to Kelly and to Avon for putting on this webinar at relatively short notice in response to some of the feedback we had through the last round of market engagement, which was really asking for some kind of more practical examples of how customer experience and quality systems could operate for the future commission services for debt advice. So I think this has been a really helpful kind of introduction, but I think it also kind of leans into the question that Alice has asked about how things can operate in terms of future services. So Alice, I'm very, very happy to kind of pick up the point that you've made in the chat about making sure there's an opportunity for people, service users, to get involved in service design, and making sure that products and services are fit for purpose within particular communities, but also more generally. And this is something that we're really keen to make sure that potential lead organisations who will be applying for those grants and their delivery partners are thinking about in terms of how they work with communities, and not just kind of general communities, but specific communities, to make sure that the services are kind of reaching people in the right way and in ways that they can land with them. What we will be doing through the assessment process, through the grant assessment process, is asking questions about the approach that they intend to take and why they've chosen to take a particular approach. So that will be the assessment process that determines who is a successful grant applicant. But we are really kind of looking to local providers to tell us what is needed within their communities. I can see your hand is up, Alice, so you're welcome to come off mute and
Thank you.
Come on
yeah.
camera if you choose, but no obligation. Go on.
And this is Teams, isn't it? Unfortunately, when I'm on Teams, my camera, if I put it on, it can often just like the whole thing just goes down. So I think that's living in Cornwall and having not the best internet access, unfortunately. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of ask about, because we definitely do, I think, have issues, and this isn't just in Cornwall, it's sort of across the board as far as I can see, with confirmation of advice letters, particularly in the letters that need to go out to clients once we've given them the advice. The letters that go out that confirm that advice in writing, which we have to do, we're finding that clients are coming back and saying, can you go through that with me again? I didn't quite understand. And I was wondering whether taking those kinds of documents when we're going to be using them. So let's say we come up with a new version of a confirmation of advice letter. Is it worth having teams of service users, clients who are happy to sort of not exactly audit those documents, do you know what I mean, but just sort of like test them to see if they are client friendly? And we used to do this in a complex needs service where I worked, where we had people with all sorts of different types of learning issues and other issues around how they would be able to look at those documents. And we used to get them in a little team around the table, and we used to say, well, this is the new leaflet that we're thinking of of using. And they would sort of go, yeah, that looks fine, I can read that, I can understand that, or not. And I just thought that was so valuable when we did do that. And could we do that again? I mean, we don't just have obviously confirmation of advice letters. We've also got things like money helper fact sheets. We've got what happens if you can't pay your debts fact sheets. And these are really useful for giving out to clients so that they can easily understand situation that they're in. And would this be something that would be kind of like acceptable to MAPS?
It's a complex question, and I think the thing that I would probably stress here, that we are commissioning a service that will be in place. These grant agreements could last for up to 9 years, Alice. So hopefully once we have a stable platform, there are lots of things that we can look at over the lifetime of these grant agreements. I'm going to invite my quality colleagues to say kind of what could be done to support in the instance this happens. And there's another colleague of mine who's on the call, Tamsin, who maybe wasn't expecting to be called upon today, who might just have a few words to say about kind of things that may be possible within the approach that we'll be taking with our learning and evaluation partners over the lifetime of these grant agreements, where there may be room for kind of specific targeted activities that kind of look at specific topics that are raised by different partners within supply. So Kelly, you've come off mute. Suspect you're going to take this for your team.
Yeah, thanks, Erica, and thank you, Alice. I think it's just probably important to reiterate that the expectation isn't that confirmation of advice becomes so overly long or complex. Actually, it's the opposite. It should be clear, accessible, and genuinely helpful to the client. And I know that that's always a really hard balance to strike. But really, I guess, purpose of confirmation advice is to understand what's been discussed, understand that the client knows their options and what's going to happen next. So it's probably less about producing something detailed for compliance purposes and more about making sure that it works for the client. So if that's through doing things that you've suggested, and as per the conversation you've just had with Erica, then I think that's absolutely something really crucial to look into within the partnership, and actually something that maybe us as MAPS will be able to support with perhaps during the mobilisation phase. So if there's anything that you wanted to give consideration to and wanted to steer through the lens of the MAP standards, then definitely during that process we'd be able to work with you and have a little think about what that could look like.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think that's, that offer of help and working together, it really speaks to the relational approach to grant management that we want to have. It's not a kind of one size fits everybody. It's about kind of working on things that matter locally. So yeah, really super helpful. And Tamsin, I did mention that I'd bring you in. So if you want to come on camera.
Hi all. Apologies, I didn't know I'd be on camera, so I have my anti-migraine glasses on. I'm not trying to look trendy. So one of the benefits of the new CBDA grants is the fact that we will be investing in a learning partner to support the grant holders alongside that throughout the whole of the potentially 9 years of grant. And that provides a real opportunity, because it means that there's a community of practice that you can all then regularly meet and learn from your peers, and it provides an opportunity to share those typical challenges that might well be around things like the confirmation of advice letters. And we've got ambitions through linking our learning partner with our evaluation partner to think about how we might want to do some particular kind of mini evaluations on thematic areas that could be things like that. So we know that in the Debt Modernisation Fund, some advice organisations have been using AI to make that process less painful and reduce some of the resources that are required in creating those letters. And so that can be the kind of thing that actually what we can do through using our evaluation partner and our learning partners is bring together so that we can reflect on kind of what's been learned and where there might be opportunities, and that can be shared with everybody else across the grant. So I think that there are lots of opportunities as we go through this that we collectively can think about how to tackle some issues that are understood, and if anybody then within the community that's providing debt advice has got suggestions or even things they've tried that didn't work, because that's also really useful to learn about. So I think that we don't expect everything to ever be perfect on day one, but hopefully through our investment in both learning and evaluation, they're both there that are meant to be resources that will bring in insight during the delivery of grants. It's not about a report at the end. We're trying to make it so that it generates insight that's useful.
Thank you, Tamsin. Yes, perfect. So we have got a couple more questions in the chat. One example is one question that Angela has raised is, if the partnership had £1 million worth of debt advice delivery, what would a strong partnership be spending on customer quality systems outlined this morning? It's really hard to put a price on quality. And I think what I would say is to this, the budget and the costings will depend on the kind of model that you're choosing. What we will do through the application process is be able to kind of advise people on or kind of reflect on the costings that people are putting in, and to kind of challenge if it looks like it's enough or it's not enough to support the delivery of the model that they're telling us that they prefer. But again, I can see that you're ready, Kelly, to add a few comments.
Yeah, thanks, Erica. And just to build upon that, really, as Erica said, we're not setting a specific percentage or spend expectation for quality. Instead, what we're looking for is whether the investment is sufficient to deliver effective oversight and consistent quality outcomes. So rather than a fixed figure, it's more about whether the model can demonstrate some of the things that have come up during this webinar. So as an example, perhaps robust supervision capacity, effective QA and sampling, clear governance and oversight, and the ability to identify and respond to risk. And we're really aware that that could look very differently depending on all partnerships, such as the size and complexity, delivery channels. So yeah, it's more about being able to evidence some of those things.
Thanks. Riven, I'll come to you in a second if I may, but just a quick one from Stephanie. Will MAPS still provide the independent quality assurance service, or will lead organisations need to arrange this themselves?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. So yes, MAPS will continue to provide the external independent quality assurance service. MAPS has an established relationship with IQAS, as we call them, which is delivered by a third-party provider, and they provide independent assurance of compliance of the standards across funded services. So lead organisations are not expected to procure with their own external independent QA service.
Super, thanks. And a thank you in the chat. Riven, if you want to come on off mute and share your question.
Hi, Erica. Hi, Kelly. Yeah, you know, you've seen the link that I've sent of the report that we carried actually through consultation in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, where we're literally, without tainted by anyone else, it was led by deemed to be vulnerable communities, were part of deemed vulnerable communities, where they themselves literally said what they wanted to say without being tainted by structures and systems, or even quality managers or complaints managers outside from the remit of their advice providers. And we came with something substantial. So really the question then is, would MAPS be interested in, I suppose what I'm trying to say is, looking at external research providers outside of lead partnership or partnership organizations to get a clean, non-tainted research outcome without worrying about what the leadership is going to say, in order to make sure it genuinely, when I mean it, the advice services genuinely meet the need of local vulnerable communities. Otherwise, those community voices, I personally feel, will not be heard at all, because the structure prevents community voices that is pure and real to be heard properly.
I'm looking at my colleagues. I hear what you're saying, Riven. What we're really keen to ensure is that our lead organisations, when they're responding to the application process, are setting out the evidence base that they've used to identify you know, which communities they should be serving and how they should be doing that. I think there's probably a broader policy question that sits outside of this community-based debt advice service here, but we are definitely interested in kind of a range of voices and making sure that our suppliers are using the broadest possible evidence base to make sure that they are meeting a range of community needs, and not only those people who are already standing at the front door when it opens each morning. So we are encouraging that and checking kind of through the application process what the evidence base is that people have used. And if we're aware that there are evidence bases which have not been used, then we can kind of point people towards those. There's a two-stage application process, and we'll be able to provide feedback to suppliers before they submit their final applications. So I'm not sure that I've fully answered your question, but it's probably broader than the scope of this community-based process.
I mean, that is not a problem at all, because obviously if we don't discuss it, we won't discuss it. So at least I've raised the question. So if you have an organization that is based in London Borough of Tower Hamlets, but the same organization talks about Timbuktu, you have to ask yourself the question, is the London Borough of Tower Hamlets organization fit for purpose?
Sure. Okay. Thank you. As I say, we begin market engagement again in London in the next financial year. So please do kind of watch that watch for those communications coming out. Alice, happy to come back to you.
Yeah, and I know I've already spoken, so if there's anyone else that has questions, I'm really happy to give way. It's just that there's another one that occurred to me, and this was around sort of like, I guess, frequency of quality checking. Is there an expectation that the IFR process still stands, or is there a chance that this would completely change to something else?
So I think it's probably going to be, again, one of those answers about what's determined by local need, but I'll come to Kelly for the official kind of quality perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the secondary question, Alice. So I think what we are saying here is that really it's up for you to decide what works well for your model. In terms of frequency of QA, we're not setting a fixed expectation or mandating a specific volume or cycle. Instead, what we are looking for is that any QA activity is regular, risk-based, and probably sufficient to provide meaningful oversight of advice quality. So probably in terms of frequency is for you to think about the size and complexity of the service and the level of risk. I think as well, just to touch on, because you mentioned the IFR there, in terms of the IFR process, I think the principle still stands in terms of having a structured approach to internal file review and using that to assess compliance with the standards, and then I guess subsequently from that feeding findings into supervision and improvement. But yeah, we're not wedded to IFR or there being a single model or methodology. It's just more maybe a question for yourselves around, is your QA approach effective in practice rather than whether it follows a specific format? And again, just to put out another plug for support during the mobilisation period of CBDA, if there is any support that you want from the customer experience and quality team at MAPS in terms of thinking about what your first line quality assurance approach looks like and some of the methodologies that could be used, then we are more than happy to help with that.
Yeah, can I just sort of throw something out there as a possibility? Would be, I was talking about frequency and, you know, the sort of, I guess, onerousness of an IFR, which I can remember the days of DAPA, and it seems to me that in a way the IFR is pretty much similar to a DAPA. It just that it happens once a month, and DAPA used to happen once a year. And actually, I think it's a really useful process, and our team thinks it's a really useful process, because what it does is it shows that when we have a lot of new starters, so we've got trainees who really need to know this stuff. So it's brilliant in terms of like, this is what you need to know, and you know, this is how we will assess this, and this is what, you know, this is what you can expect to see. So, you know, it is absolutely brilliant and really, really useful. But I think sometimes, especially for new people, it can be a little bit, what? I didn't know that I was going to have to sort of go this far in depth into things, and it can be a little bit demoralizing. So I was just wondering, you know, is it open to like literally whatever the lead organizations, etc., decide, or you know, could we put in something like, we'd have like a really full version every quarter and a more light touch version every month? You know, are all of those things on the table? Are those things possible? It's just that we need to decide.
Yeah, absolutely, Alice. Completely
Right.
up for the partnerships to decide what that looks like. It's more, we'll be looking at outcomes and evidence, so whether issues are being identified early, whether trends are being understood, whether like findings are being acted on, and is there alignment with independent assessment. So all of that is up for you to design. The only things that we ask for is that you are aware of compliance against the MAP standards, which obviously feeds into the regulation that's within this sector, and there will be a requirement, though that's not completely shaped yet, in terms of feeding into independent quality and having a version of a case to be able to do that.
And just to pick up something that you said earlier as well, Kelly, that it needs to be risk-based. So if you're in your example, Alice, the quarterly suggested that there was a raft of problems that hadn't been picked up by the light touch kind of reviews. Your risk approach and your risk appetite would need to change as a result of that. So it's something that you could dial up and dial down. And I think the other thing that I would stress is we probably expect to see a range of different approaches from different areas, and quality colleagues are looking forward to kind of seeing what they can learn from the different approaches that people do when we're not putting you in a straitjacket. So I think there's a lot to be learned along the delivery timeline of community-based debt advice.
And I can see there's a comment there from Kerry about the corrective actions for clients. Obviously that's a really important consideration. If you let things, if you're not reviewing very regularly, you may miss things actually that your client really needed to know. They could have been not sufficiently advised, let's say, and that is the kind of thing that an IFR would pick up on. And if you do them monthly, you can hope to pick up on those. But I also think there's a lot to be said for a more sort of alongside that, a lighter touch sort of approach on a wider range of cases, possibly, if you see what I mean. So we IFR one case a month. If our advisors are seeing 4 clients a week, then that's only 1 out of, I don't know, 16 every 4 weeks that we're seeing. Do you see what I mean? That we're looking at. And actually, is there something to be said for having a sort of, a more basic review on a larger number of cases alongside a really in-depth review on one of those cases? And I'm just open to looking at all of those models at the moment to see what
and definitely something to discuss locally as you're kind of doing the service design approach in your region, which again is part of the second wave of the grant competition process. So another 12 months to kind of do your service design piece. So keen to take any other questions in the last couple of minutes if there are any. But again, just really big thank you to quality and customer experience colleagues for kind of coming and bringing some kind of live examples to what is the art of the possible for people designing their services. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, I think that's it. Thanks everyone. Thanks for your time today, and see you all soon. Take care.